very corrupt police officer went outside the home of one of the biggest industrialists in the country, one of the biggest industrialists in the world, was planting bombs outside their house.
Currently, what are the most important problems that are holding Maharashtra back?
Had India opened up its economy, had it liberalized its economy in the 80s, in the 70s even, we would have had great opportunities. We would have been at par with China.
The party in general did everything that, to me at least, looks like a very big mistake that compromised on the growth of the country.
So India has to be very careful about getting into that debt trap.
Can you in very simple words explain to me what exactly is CAA and NRC?
Dr. Manmohan Singh said, this is on record, you can go on YouTube, search this on YouTube. He said religious minorities in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh who are being persecuted must be given citizenship. This was being opposed for the sake of opposing, despite a Congress Prime Minister as leader of opposition advocating for it.
What exactly is the fundamental governance philosophical difference between Eknath Shinde and Uddhav Thackeray? Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Indian Business Podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Sir, I get a very chill vibe from you, and I feel like you're unfiltered and transparent. And that is very rare to find in a politician. So either I'm terribly wrong or you're just exceptional. So I'm going to ask you all the questions that I possibly can so that I can understand how do you assess governance. And the more deeper we can go, the better it is. So you can be as specific as possible, because using this podcast, I want the citizens to have like a handbook by which they can actually assess if the government that they're being governed by is doing a good job or not. And I want to start with the fundamentals of great governance. So according to you, what are the most important parameters to gauge the quality of a particular government? And what was the contribution of Dr. Manmohan Singh in the great governance of India?
Firstly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and good to meet you guys. There was a political theorist, I'm confused whether it was Max Weber, who said no matter who you vote for, government always gets in.
Government always?
Always gets in.
Okay.
What that really means is that regardless of which party you vote for in any democracy, certainly political parties, political leaders have differing visions to take their country forward, to take their state forward. But there is an underlying bureaucracy which is always there. And I think governance, to me, great governance and the way you would judge a party and a government in terms of their philosophy of governance is which party or government believes genuinely in disintermediating the relationship between the citizen and government. Good example, for instance, if you look at Ola, you look at Uber. What have they done? They've disintermediated the process of hailing a taxi. They made it simple. So how does a government disintermediate providing a service to a citizen? That to me is the biggest example of which party and which government is committed to move ahead on governance. One thing I will say, which is non-political, is that there are many governance initiatives that happened actually from Vajpayeeji's time in his government in 1999 to 2004, which were carried forward by Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister. I too was a Minister of IT in that government. They brought in more reforms, RTI, Right to Information. That government brought in e-governance. And then under Prime Minister Modi ji, expanded that to include direct benefits transfer, really utilizing Aadhaar to empower the common person and disintermediate layers that exist between government and the citizen. So in some ways, there has been a political direction, regardless of which party is in power, to improve the quality of service that a government meets out to the citizens of the country. And in that sense, India is very encouraging, because India in many ways, despite all our problems, is many years and decades ahead of the world. I'll give you a very small example, a recent example. During COVID, look at the CoWIN app that we all had, that CoWIN app automatically told you you're eligible for a vaccine. It automatically registered the day you took your first shot. It automatically reminded you that you're due for your second shot, or at some point the third shot. And it automatically generated a certificate which could be used globally and in India, whether you're traveling, to say that you're vaccinated. Look at the system in the United States. My friends in the US, they would go to a Walgreens, which is a local pharmacy store, to get a vaccine. You just went in there, you took a jab, you got a piece of paper. The record was left to you, the citizen, to determine whether you're eligible for a second one, when it's due. So this is a fantastic example of how e-governance, of how India is many, many years, decades ahead of its competitors. In fact, CoWIN app, if I'm not mistaken, the Prime Minister suggested that we are opening this, making it an open source app, so that any country in the world can use it to provide their citizens a better service. This was a indigenously developed app, indigenously developed idea. And this was made available to the world. Great service to the world. So I think India in many ways as a country which was historically very, very inefficient in determining which citizen requires a subsidized gas cylinder, and which is why you had wastage, which is why a former Prime Minister in the 80s, Rajiv Gandhi, said that out of 1 rupee that is sent from New Delhi, only 15 paise reaches the intended beneficiary. Today that number has increased significantly because of successive reforms, successive initiatives. There's no doubt this government has taken that to a whole new level in terms of improving the quality of service, improving that ratio of how much money reaches the pockets of the intended beneficiary once dispatched from Delhi. So to me, that is the best example of governance. Another very good example of governance could be disinvestment. There was a time when India gained independence where there was no private sector in the country. There was a debate between socialism, capitalism. These were largely untested models in the 40s. Government of India had to build companies in the areas of shipping, in the areas to transport crucial cargo like oil, to import oil. We had to build companies which were obviously state-owned to transport people, railways being an example. You had to build companies to explore energy, ONGC being an example, to provide retail services of refined oil, diesel and petrol, BPCL, HPCL, IOC being an example. You had to prepare defense companies. You had to have Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. You had to have companies in the tourism sector, in a B2C space, hotel chains, airline chains. But there was a point in time where India came of age. India's private sector was much more efficient in providing those services, better quality services. Let's say a hotel, better quality hotels to the consumer at a more affordable price. And then you ask the debate, why do we still run these inefficient government companies? Because who's funding these companies ultimately? It's you and I, the taxpayer. So why are we overburdening the taxpayer for the sake of a few inefficient unions when the consumer is benefiting more from the private sector? And it's not a crucial enterprise. One can argue that in certain sectors you need, in defense maybe you need certain PSUs, maybe in energy you need certain PSUs. But today I remember when I was Shipping Minister of India, in 2012 or so, 13, the share of Shipping Corporation of India in terms of exempt trade, the private shipping companies were almost 90% plus. So Shipping Corporation of India as a strategic asset of the government of India, of the people of India, to bring crude oil to India. If let's say the world decides we are shutting down we don't want to send ships to India. But 90% of that is already happening from private companies. So the share of public sector fell. then you ask a question, why do we still subsidize these companies? This is actually inefficient for the people. It's not a pro-capitalist or socialist debate. It's not a left versus right binary. And then you should move towards disinvestment. You should start selling these unproductive assets, especially the loss-making PSUs, especially public sector undertakings which are in the B2C space, where there is no way that a government of India enterprise can provide better quality of service to the citizen than a private company. That's just the way things work. The private sector is driven by profit. The government company can continue to have losses decade after decade after decade and go to the government, and the government will fund them with whose money? It's not the government's, it's not some minister's money, it's the taxpayer's money. So to me, I would say, when a voter votes for governance, because we're in election time now, it's very important to look at which party, which prime minister has an agenda to make government more efficient at delivering a certain service to you and I, the citizen. Number one, which prime minister has the objective of not overburdening taxpayers? Number three, which prime minister and party and government in their manifesto does not want to burden future generations with high debt? Today you look at a country like America, the per capita debt is massive. One is it went up because of the war on terror, almost $8.3 trillion spent on the war on terror over 20 years. What did they get back in return? The Taliban came back to Afghanistan after 20 years. But that $8.3 trillion means the government of America borrowed. Now they have a massive stimulus package after COVID. That means they're borrowing more. Plus taxes are low, so you're not getting revenue. So one option is you print money. You print money, you have high inflation. So today, who is the biggest lender to America? One of the biggest lenders, China. Is that in America's strategic interest? That a country who they see as a political, economic, military adversary, if not at the very least a threat, is today their lender, is today in many ways subsidizing the American economy. So India has to be very careful about getting into that debt trap. And for that, you need a government that believes in not overburdening future generations. And I don't mean to make a political point, but I think I would say that the initiatives of this government, and especially of the Prime Minister's vision, whether it's disinvesting, whether it's using technology to provide better quality of service to the citizens, whether it's not wanting to overburden future generations so that India is strong economically and can sustain itself over the years. Because keep in mind, we have a demographic dividend that, forget about America and Europe, who have a major problem with an aging population. Even China doesn't have that. So if we burden that future generation and convert that demographic dividend into a demographic headache, then imagine how we will lose out in 10 years or 20 years from now. So I think it's very clear who the young generation and who people should elect in terms of who has improved their quality of service. But a good thing is that this is something which is almost largely non-political in terms of delivery of service. In terms of overburdening the taxpayer, there are differences between party A, government, the government of the day, and the opposition. I'm certainly in favor of what the government is proposing. But in terms of improving the efficiency of the delivery of services, there seems to be largely continuity in policy, in reforms. And I think that's a healthy trend for our country.
So to summarize this, what you're saying is, if you want to assess a particular government, you first have to look at disintermediation so that the government can improve the efficiency of the ecosystem instead of improving the efficiency of the government itself. Because what you're saying is, if you improve the efficiency of the ecosystem, by definition, the government will become efficient. Number two is,
you can also improve the efficiency of government. That's a separate conversation. How do you have bureaucratic reforms? How do you ensure the bureaucracy is also held accountable? That's a completely separate conversation that needs to happen. That has been happening to a large extent in the last, I would say, the last 5 to 7 years. But is there more work that needs to happen in that area? Most certainly. But yes, which government intends to disintermediate the bureaucracy in terms of delivering a service to the customer, making things more streamlined, making things easier. That is a very critical process. Another example, when I was a minister of IT in the government of India, there was an e-governance, national e-governance plan. Now it's part of Digital India and part of various other initiatives. If you went to the government of India before 2009 or 10, and you wanted to get your passport renewed, you wanted to travel overseas, you wanted to get more pages on your passport, it was the most inefficient, discretionary process. You almost had to go to an MP. In fact, I had a lot of requests as an MP. People coming to me and saying, can you please write to the passport officer to give me an appointment because I have to travel urgently? Why should that be the case? What if you can't meet your MP? What if your MP writes a letter but the passport officer is busy? Is that an efficient system? We implemented a system called Passport Seva Kendra, brought in TCS as a partner, which is the biggest software company in the world, Tata Consultancy Services, and created a public-private partnership where if you went to the government to renew your passport, to get new pages on your passport, in a time-bound manner, whether you meet your MP, whether you know who your MP is, whether your MP writes a letter, whether you know who the passport officer is or not, you are getting that passport renewed.
I'm a beneficiary of that, sir.
Are you okay? I'm also a beneficiary.
Because my father told me that it's a big hassle, and that is the reason why I delayed getting my passport done. But then I had a Europe trip to go to, and then he said, now the system has changed, so you should apply. And when we actually applied, even he was surprised as to how easy the system has become.
Right. So I was looking after that project, the National E-Governance Plan.
Wow.
We did many things like this, making your income tax returns, filing them online. Of course, e-governance has evolved considerably in the last decade or so. CoWIN is an example, an extended example of e-governance, the CoWIN app during COVID. So using technology to disintermediate government. And I think in that sense, this government has done exceptionally well in taking that forward. So those are the areas I would say are really areas that improve governance. Wherein now the government of India, for example, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has announced a faceless assessment policy. So when you and I file an income tax return, what could happen was a assessing officer in the income tax department would contact you and say, Ganesh, you filed your tax as 5 lakhs for the year. Actually, you owe us 10 lakhs. And you like, I don't owe you 10 lakhs. I don't have that income. On what basis are you saying that? And then there could be a scope for corruption, which would open up. That would happen.
Even now.
Would be happening. Now, under Nirmala Sitharaman's leadership, they're experimenting with a system called faceless assessments. So when you file your income tax returns, it goes through an online portal wherein the assessing officer could be an officer not in your zone. If you live in Mumbai, it's not from Mumbai, it could be from Raipur, Chhattisgarh. So there's a faceless assessment. Is it working perfectly? Perhaps not. Is there scope for improvement? Yes. But I'm glad the government is experimenting with these kind of initiatives. Ultimately, what is it doing? It's reducing the interface between the government, bureaucracy, a politician, and the citizen. What does that in principle do? In principle, it reduces the scope of corruption, of harassment, of delays. So, those are the areas which I would say significantly improve governance in our country. And in many ways, we are leaps and bounds ahead of the world. Today, our election system, I can tell you, is there scope for improvement? Yes. But our election system is one of the best in the world. I fought 4 elections. It's one of the best in the world in terms of using technology to deliver, again, a service. This is a government service that the government is delivering, ensuring that your vote is, your ability to vote is done in a seamless manner, in a transparent manner, in a fair manner, in an accessible manner. Look at the United States, the oldest democracy in the world. It's fascinating. I tell my American friends, 20 years ago, in the presidential election between Al Gore and George Bush Jr. Al Gore, a Democrat, said that the election was stolen by George Bush, a Republican. 20 years later, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, a Republican accused the Democrats of stealing the election. In 20 years, the same narrative. A lack of a smooth transition of power. No significant improvements to the election process. So we have a lot going for us as a country. There is significant scope to improve governance. But I think governments, and this government in particular, have made great strides in improving the delivery of services to the citizens of India. I think citizens also, you and I as citizens also have to walk that path and walk halfway and ensure that if we want a service, we are not willing to take the shortcut and indulge in corruption. That's also essential.
So, sir, to summarize this, economic indicators so that we understand that we're not burdened by the present deeds of the government in the future. That can be assessed using RBI standards. Number 2 is disintermediation. And one example of the same is disinvestment. And then you said the government also needs to improve its own efficiency. An example of the same is e-governance. Sir, when you look at the Congress party, your family has been associated with the Congress party for 55 years now. And now I can see as a citizen that there are just countless things that are wrong with the Congress party. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Number 1, India was flooded with a lot of scandals and scams. Number 2, the party does not have a leader that I can look up to. Number 3, the license Raj, like you mentioned, lasted for too long. And number 4, the party in general did everything that, to me at least, looks like a very big mistake that compromised on the growth of the country. One example that I strongly believe in is the adoption of socialism. Singapore liberalized in the early 1970s. China liberalized in 1978. We saw socialism fail in China, after which they opened up their economy. And yet, we opened up our economy in 1991 when we were just a few weeks away from bankruptcy. And another example of the same, where you mentioned the burden on the future, is the old pension scheme. So my question is, A, is it as bad as it looks like? B, if yes, why?
Look, analyzing the Congress or psychoanalyzing the Congress now is something I've moved away from.
Okay.
I've moved out of that party. I tried a lot to reform the party from within during its most challenging decade, from 2014 to 2024. I tried my best to, despite power, despite any prospect of power, stayed loyal to that party given my family's relationship. But at any point in life, regardless of which organization you work in, which profession you're in, whether you're a politician, whether you're a salaried employee working in a company, you can only do so much to go and tell the leadership that it's time to reform, it's time to improve. Beyond a point, if they don't value what you bring to the table, you have to move on. Otherwise, you're not able to contribute. And for me, when I entered politics in 2004, I was one of the youngest MPs at the time. I was 27 years of age. I always entered politics with a much higher purpose in life. For me, public service came before party. For me, India came before party. Loyalty to your country, loyalty to the public, to delivering public services has to come before political party. So now what is wrong with the Congress is something the Congress will have to get its act together. If the Congress loses this election again for the third time, I can only hope, and I can only say this through your channel, that I hope they provide India with at least a constructive opposition. Opposing anything for the sake of everything for the sake of opposing is not a constructive opposition. As a member of the Congress, there were many times in the last 10 years I praised the Prime Minister for certain initiatives. I've seen certain things work on the ground. When the Prime Minister talked about Make in India as early as, I think, 2014 or 15, the criticism in the Congress was it's never going to happen. India can't make it happen. It's happening. Today the world has, and for many reasons, It's happening because India has got is getting its infrastructure story correct. It's happening because Government of India is giving production link incentive subsidies to companies to manufacture in India, to create jobs in India. It's also happening because after COVID, global investors have now a China plus one strategy.
Yeah.
They want to hedge their bets. They don't want to have their manufacturing bases only in China. I'm not saying they only want to come to India. They're also going to Bangladesh. They're also going to Vietnam. They're also going to other countries in this region. But India is certainly benefiting from that. But if India was not ready, if the Prime Minister had not made a clarion call to make in India, if the Prime Minister had not laid out a plan to get the infrastructure ready, if the Prime Minister had not created a production link incentive, then when this opportunity came, this geopolitical opportunity came, we wouldn't be ready.
Yeah.
So kudos to the Prime Minister for having the vision to do that, which frankly no Prime Minister or no government was thinking about. The view was that, India has moved to a services economy. We can't go back to manufacturing anymore. We can't compete with China. But things were changing. China was also, its per capita was increasing. China was no longer an efficient market to produce.
Yeah.
Countries like Vietnam, who had a lower per capita income, were taking a lion's share of manufacturing away. Today now, under the Prime Minister's leadership, the biggest mobile manufacturing plant in the world is in India, just a few kilometers away from Delhi. Samsung has brought it there. So one of the problems with the Congress was, and I believe that the Congress did good things for India. Yes, you can argue was the economic reform process brought in a decade, 2 decades later than say China? Yes, it was. I'm willing to concede. In fact, my father was one of the earliest advocates that we must have economic reforms in the late 70s and early 80s.
Wow.
In the late 70s, early 80s, he believed we have to open up our private sector. We have to allow our private sector to flourish. We may not have come of age in every sector, but we must allow that to flourish.
Why didn't they allow that?
Again, there are many reasons for that, but now there's no point going into what happened. But I think the Congress was, to be fair, there was also a time where India was not sure about economic reforms. And this was across the political spectrum. To be fair, whether you were on the left or you were on the right, across the spectrum, there was broad consensus that we don't want too much of economic reforms.
Okay.
Because
sir, I'll tell you why
91 was a turning point, not because the government wanted to proactively do it, but they had to do it reactively.
Correct.
Because the country's finances were in a devastating situation. But yes, had India opened up its economy, had it liberalized its economy in the 80s, in the 70s even, we would have had great opportunities. We would have been at par with China. Our per capita would have been at par with China today. Did we miss out? Yes. In fact, we also did a few more aggressive things. We nationalized at some points. We also nationalized banks. We also nationalized textile companies, which made the country's private sector a little more inefficient.
Yeah.
Set it back by a decade or so. But I still think that there is now a very clear economic vision that we have in our country. We have to take that vision forward. And I think that we have a very interesting opportunity where we can increase the share of manufacturing as a contributor to our economy, vis-a-vis services and vis-a-vis agriculture. We can expand that because manufacturing is also a very aspirational sector. It provides jobs, but it's also very aspirational, whether we like it or not. Is it the ideal situation? In my opinion, no. But the fact that young people in rural areas want to migrate to tier 2, tier 3 cities, to urban areas and get jobs in manufacturing is a reality. Want to get jobs in the services sector, in IT-enabled services is a reality. That is also creating a new kind of challenge in our country, which is urbanization. We need to urbanize quickly, certainly not as fast as China, where you have ghost cities, where you have now real estate companies bankrupt, which is causing other problems. But we certainly need to up our urbanization plan. There is an aspirational factor. So as manufacturing increases, as the government's initiatives are yielding results, more and more people in rural areas, young people will say, I don't want to be in farming or in agriculture, I want to move. But then how do you create urban amenities? How do you create affordable housing? That's another conversation.
Correct.
And that affects even cities like Mumbai, the MMR region, the Mumbai metropolitan region. So these are challenges that are before our nation. But I do believe that we're moving in the right trajectory. I do believe that, things like old pension schemes, which actually is a burden, not just on future taxpayers, but even on pensioners.
Right.
It's unfortunate.
They're trying to bring it back, sir.
It's unfortunate that political parties are using that as a short-term means to get votes, when actually the biggest loser of the old pension scheme will be the pensioners themselves.
Correct.
Will be government employees themselves. Today you're depriving, in an old pension scheme, a government employee of riding the economic wave of India.
Exactly.
You're depriving the pensioner, the government employee in the old pension scheme, of being able to invest 5%, 10%, 15% of their savings in the stock market, which in 20 years, 30 years is the highest yielding asset class in our country.
Correct.
Better than even real estate. Why are we depriving people of that? See, that is a negative problem which is to oppose for the sake of opposing. I'll give you another political example. When CAA happened, Citizenship Amendment Act. Now, this is in fact an interesting legislation. This is a legislation which I've said many times. Actually, there was political consensus. Dr. Manmohan Singh, as leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha, barely a year or 2 years before he became Prime Minister, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji was Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh said, this is on record, you can go on YouTube, search this on YouTube. He said religious minorities in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh who are being persecuted must be given citizenship. He was not against CA. When this happened, this was being opposed for the sake of opposing, despite a Congress Prime Minister as leader of opposition advocating for it. What was the narrative that was said to people? That, oh, if you're a Muslim, you will lose your citizenship of India. Today has a single Muslim in 4 years lost their citizenship of India.
Sir, can you in very simple words explain to me what exactly is CAA and NRC so that people have a reference from the statesman himself?
Essentially, it's as I said, it's a bipartisan policy because Dr. Manmohan Singh as leader of opposition advocated for it. But when the Prime Minister of India, Dr. Narendra Modi ji implemented it, it was opposed by the Congress. Essentially what it means is that if you are a religious minority in countries that were part of India, when India was partitioned and gained its independence, you are fleeing persecution, India will give you safe haven. It's not limited to Hindus, it also includes Parsis, it also includes other small micro religions like Christians, Buddhists. But what was the narrative when it was implemented? The narrative being floated by those opposing the Prime Minister was that Muslims will lose their citizenship. Today, I ask them, has one Muslim lost his or her citizenship in the last 4 years? So why was that fear-mongering happen? And the same fear-mongering that was happening with CA is today happening with pensioners on old pension scheme. That if you are a pensioner and you move to the new pension scheme, you will be deprived of your pension. In fact, it's the other way around. You're risking that pensioner from getting their pension with the old pension scheme. You're risking that pensioner from getting access to India's growth story. Why are we depriving them of that? So these are unfortunately only short-term political gimmicks which are only designed with one purpose, that oppose whatever the Prime Minister says. That kind of constructive opposition unfortunately has been missing in India in the last 10 years. And I hope in this election, if Congress loses a third time in a row, at least the country will get a constructive opposition that works with the government, opposes on certain areas, but works with the government to further India's cause.
Very interesting. Sir, can you give me an example of e-governance? Give me a problem that is existing today, and if I bring in e-governance, how will it be solved in the future?
I mean, there are many areas to improve e-governance. Let's say today you're you open a cafe. You want to get a permit from the municipality. Firstly, the municipality's permits should be very clearly defined. When you asked me earlier, how do you improve bureaucracy, income tax? Firstly, those departments have to clearly define what is legal, what is illegal. Can't leave it grey, because grey means it's left to interpretation, which means it opens up the door for harassment and corruption.
And also eliminates automation.
It also eliminates the ability to automate, but it opens up the door for corruption, for interpretation. You have to reduce the ability to have different interpretations. So someone says, Ganesh, you owe 5 lakhs of tax. You say, no, I only owe 2 lakhs of tax. Eliminate that door for interpretation. Very clearly, Ganesh has earned this much income, Ganesh has to pay this much tax, chapter over. Then the government, the income tax official has no right to hold you, to demand money from you. Secondly, if they do that, are they being held accountable? When it's very black and white that Ganesh does not owe the government that much amount of tax, are they being held accountable for unnecessarily harassing you, for taking a matter to the courts through a judicial process which wastes time, which prevents other more important matters from being heard? And in the case of, let's say, a municipal permit, make that process online. Move towards an e-government system. Move towards an e-permit system. You apply to the BMC. Why should it take so long? Within a stipulated period of time, maybe 24 hours, 48 hours, if you're meeting all the criteria, whatever the criteria is, you have a fire exit, let's say, in your cafe, you're given permission. And then there's no scope of harassing you. So these are the areas we need to improve. One is using technology to disintermediate the relationship between government, bureaucracy and the citizen. But 2, also making laws and rules watertight, black and white, so that you remove the scope of interpretation which opens the door to corruption.
A classic example of the same is also RERA, right?
Yes.
It is not open to interpretation.
Yes.
Saves the home buyer's money and clearly defines what exactly can the builder utilize the funds for.
And clearly stipulates what the builder's duty is to provide a citizen, works in favor of the citizen, works in favor of the home buyer, and has powers to punish the builder, which is unfortunately an industry which has as bad a reputation as politicians, and holds them accountable, where if they are not honoring those commitments, they are punished.
Yeah. Sir, what would
I'll summarize this point.
Okay.
Improving governance is a multifaceted approach. Using technology is a means of e-governance. But also the government has to do a lot of homework. The government also has to make its laws, rules consumer friendly, citizen friendly, and reduce interpretation. If both those go hand in hand, you then have a golden era of great governance.
Sir, with governance, I have one question. What exactly is the fundamental governance philosophical difference between Eknath Shinde and Uddhav Thackeray? Because what I can see is that they both have 2 different philosophies.
I would say the biggest difference between them is that the fundamental difference that I've seen, and I don't say this in a politically negative way against anybody, Eknath Shinde is a man who's come from very, very humble beginnings. He knows exactly what the common person needs. But at the same time, he has a very modern vision. At the same time, he knows what a person, a Marathi man living in a chawl, a person living in a slum, what do they need? What are their concerns? What are their problems? But he also knows what does an industrialist need to grow industry in Maharashtra. Number 2, he's extremely hardworking. I would say, in fact, and I sometimes tell him this, that he's hardworking to an extent where he sleeps 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day. And I tell him this, that this can lead to a health problem. You must space out your work. And this is not during election time, even between elections. Thirdly, he is somebody who is extremely accessible. If you go to Varsha Bungalow, which is the Chief Minister's official residence in Malabar Hill, and I have been going to that bungalow as a young child from my childhood. I've seen many Chief Ministers, Sharad Pawarji, VP Nayak, many Chief Ministers as a young boy growing up, because my father was in politics. I've never seen Varsha Bungalow like this.
As in what, sir?
Anybody is allowed to enter. Everybody who enters gets a meeting with the Chief Minister, whether you've taken an appointment, not taken an appointment. Everybody leaves with food in their mouth. If you waited for 4 hours, for 5 hours. So he's a very accessible, kind human being. And those are the different styles in governance.
So currently, what are the most important problems that are holding Maharashtra back? Let's talk in case of ease of doing business. And how does Shiv Sena intend to solve this for Maharashtra in the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, I think firstly in Maharashtra is one of the most industrialized states in the country.
Yeah.
We've always benefited from the largest investments. We have been rolling out infrastructure in a massive way, but we need to do much, much more. I would say today, if you look at one of the biggest engines of economic growth is the MMR region, the Mumbai metropolitan region.
Yeah.
In the last few years, look at the infrastructure that's come out in this region. A coastal road that has connected North Mumbai to South Mumbai. I'm very happy about it because I think South Mumbai is going to come back in a big way. I think when the Bandra Sea Link was built, it moved the business district away from Nariman Point, Churchgate, Back Bay to BKC, Kalina. With the coastal road coming, no offense to people living in the suburbs, South Mumbai is going to come back. I'm excited about South Mumbai coming back. With the Atal Setu, what has it done? It's connected the island city to the hinterland. Keep in mind, in 1885, New York City built the Brooklyn Bridge. 1885. Connecting Manhattan to the hinterland, to Queens, Bronx, all these areas. Brooklyn. That is what is going to happen with the Atal Setu. You're going to allow for people to live in more affordable places, but yet commute to Mumbai, to South Mumbai, to North Mumbai very, very quickly. So there has been a massive transformation in the infrastructure in the MMR region, which is a huge, huge growth center for Maharashtra, for Maharashtra's economy. The exciting news, if you ask me 20 years ago, MMR was the only economic growth center in Maharashtra. Today, Nagpur has taken off very nicely. I think people like Devendra Fadnavis ji, who's been chief minister, who's deputy chief minister, a man like Mr. Nitin Gadkari, who you interviewed, who's an MP of Nagpur, they've brought a lot of development and growth and infrastructure to Nagpur. Good. I'm saying it as a Mumbaikar, I'm glad. It's creating new economic centers. Nasik is quickly becoming a new economic center. Pune is becoming a new economic center. In fact, with the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, Mumbai-Pune are becoming one extended economic center. With the Navi Mumbai airport coming, the Navi Mumbai airport can also feed Pune. So, we need in Maharashtra, it's a big state, it's the second largest state, I think, by population. It's certainly one of the most industrialized states. We need to create new centers of economic growth. And that is something which is beginning to happen at a very rapid pace. Can we expand that to more places? Absolutely. Can we move that to the south of Maharashtra, Sindhudurg on the border of Goa? We should. We have a new airport now. Will that also lead to more economic activity in that region? Certainly. Can we move that to Gadchiroli? We must. Today, the chief minister, under his leadership, Gadchiroli, which was a Naxal infested area, under his leadership, he's moved steel companies there. He's aggressively said, no, we will provide you with security, we will provide you with safety, go in and invest there. I've seen him working in Davos. I was with him. I was in Davos this time when he was there, working round the clock to bring investments to Maharashtra, convincing large steel companies like ArcelorMittal. Yeah. I remember I made Mr. Ellen Mittal, who runs the biggest steel company in the world, meet the chief minister. And he's saying, come to Gadchiroli. Gadchiroli is no longer this Naxal place which is unsafe. So you need dynamic, proactive leadership with a vision which irons out, makes business easy for people. Ultimately, what does a businessman want? Small businessman or a large businessman? They are saying, government, please facilitate investment, please get out of the way, don't trouble us, and we will come there. That's all they want. So I think Maharashtra is doing exceedingly well. I also think some of the things that were happening in the past, where, I don't know if you remember, but a very corrupt police officer went outside the home of one of the biggest industrialists in the country, one of the biggest industrialists in the world, was planting bombs outside their house, got arrested. The government of the day giving them a clean chit. That kind of politics, that kind of extortionist approach will not be tolerated by this government. And if you do those kinds of things, you'll obviously move investments away from Maharashtra. People will say this government is not keen on law and order. This government is encouraging police and other government officials to extort money from them. This happened outside Mukesh Ambani's home.
Yeah.
Shocking. So if a small trader will feel if this can happen outside the biggest industrialist home, what will I be facing?
Correct.
So giving confidence to investors, small, medium, large, domestic, international, is very, very critical in our state and in our country. And that is something which is happening under this government, which I find very encouraging. But I would say providing ease of business, reducing harassment, creating new economic centers, boosting your existing economic centers like the MMR region with infrastructure projects like Atal Setu, like the coastal road, like the metro, like the Navi Mumbai airport. These are huge drivers of economic growth in our state and in our country.
And how do you measure all these things, sir? Firstly, so to summarize this, you're saying we need new centers of economic growth. Number two, we need more security.
No, sorry to interrupt. Like Navi Mumbai. Navi Mumbai is, I think, a 40-year-old idea or a 50-year-old idea. Navi Mumbai never took off.
Why, sir?
It didn't take off because you didn't have infrastructure. You didn't have connectivity.
Okay.
You need connectivity. What is the connectivity between Mumbai and Navi Mumbai and Uran and that area? You have a bridge which takes you there directly from South Mumbai. You have an airport. All of these will bring economic activity. Navi Mumbai will grow. Uran will grow. The area around JNPT will grow. The third Mumbai is being envisioned by the state government.
Yeah.
So you cannot just dream and say, I want to build a new Mumbai. You want to build a new Mumbai? Are you building an airport? Are you building connectivity? Can someone who wants to have affordable housing live in that Navi Mumbai, but yet commute to Mumbai within 20 minutes, half an hour? Are there road and rail links? Are there ferry links? Boat links? This is how you reimagine things. In fact, for Mumbai, I believe we have to reimagine even Mumbai's economic power and Mumbai's economic growth engines. I'll give you an example of transportation. I was shipping minister. Mumbai is benefited by, it's an island city. It's surrounded by water. We have to utilize these water resources. Today there's a ferry between Mandwa, Alibag and Mumbai. There's a new ferry coming between Mumbai and Kashid. I remember as shipping minister, I was wanting to give permissions for these kind of projects. Even for the Trans-Harbour Sea Link, the Atal Setu Bridge, because that the harbour is run by Mumbai Port Trust technically. We can also use the Western Corridor. Imagine a hovercraft facility or a fast ferry like you have in Hong Kong, which is also a city surrounded by water, between Nariman Point to Warsaw. The coastal road will take you there once completed, but it's for motorists, people who have cars, who are chauffeur driven. What about for people who want public transportation?
True.
Rails is one thing, metro is one thing. Also have a ferry.
Do you intend to bring that in the next 5 years?
I hope to bring that. I hope to work with, of course, there are concerns, there are constraints. Getting permission is one part of it. Getting a private operator to run it or a government operator to run it is the second part of it. There are also fishermen in the area. There are many kolivadas. There is Machhimar Nagar in Kaf Parade. There's Worli Kolivada in Worli. There's Versova Kolivada. There's Mahim, there are kolivadas. How do you allow for them also to exist? They are the original inhabitants of Mumbai. But there are solutions. We have to think of solutions. We have to think out of the box. So Mumbai, for instance.
Yeah.
Mumbai once upon a time was the only growth engine in our entire country.
True.
It was the only financial capital growth engine in our country. Today, whether we like it or not, certainly Navi Mumbai, Mahape, Vashi is a huge hub of IT and IT enabled services. Companies like Mindspace are doing huge work there. But can we deny that Hyderabad, that Bangalore, that Chennai have taken away a large part of the IT share? We can't deny it. We have to accept that.
Yeah.
What do we do reimagining Mumbai for the next 20 years? I'm not talking about the next 5 years. My vision is that Mumbai's competition is no longer Bangalore, is no longer Surat, it's no longer Chennai, it's no longer Kolkata, it's no longer Delhi and the NCR region. I believe that Mumbai's competition, we have to dream big. Our competition has to be Dubai and Singapore.
Absolutely, sir. I was just about to say that only.
And for that, how do I utilize the fact that Mumbai is still the financial services hub of India? There are huge disruptions happening in fintech. How do I build on that and make Mumbai the fintech hub of the world, not just of India? How do I make Mumbai the creative services hub of the world? Today, the advertising industry, Bollywood, is headquartered here. Today, large companies that are doing the visual effects for Hollywood studios are headquartered here. How do I build on that? A company like DNEG, Double Negative, they do visual effects for Hollywood studios, for the biggest movies. They won Oscars. Their centers are in Mumbai. Why can't I expand on that? So this is how we will have to reimagine Mumbai also. Today, a company, the biggest drone manufacturing company in India, Idea Forge, is headquartered in Navi Mumbai. How do I make Mumbai a robotics, drone, high-end technology manufacturing hub? When I say Mumbai, I mean the extended MMR region. So Mumbai will have to rethink, because it is losing market share in certain sectors to other cities. Like IT is one example. But certainly financial services, fintech, certainly creative services. I believe drone manufacturing, robotics manufacturing, other high-end strategic electronics, these areas can be brought to Mumbai. We can build on that base. So if we don't do that, then even Mumbai will lose its comparative edge as compared to other parts of Maharashtra, other parts of India.
Yeah.
But the vision must be very big, very, very grand. So my vision is that don't think of what's happening in Chennai and Bangalore and Hyderabad and in Gujarat. Think of what's happening in UAE. Think of what's happening in Saudi Arabia. Because they're a 3-hour flight from you. They're as far away from you as Kolkata is.
True.
Think of what's happening in Singapore.
Sir, I'm comparing Mumbai with Abu Dhabi only, because to me Abu Dhabi is the standard benchmark of great town planning. And all of what you mentioned is going to build on the back of great town planning, right? So in Mumbai, I still remember one of my friends, he went to an Ed Sheeran concert. It took him 4 hours to get there because of the traffic. So the ceiling is great, but every other road is so messed up, so congested, because the town planning has been so not well thought of, that today there is congestion everywhere. So my question is, how do we decongest Mumbai?
Yeah, so many ways. I would ideally prefer, when your friend has to go to an Ed Sheeran concert, they take the metro, they take public transportation. People who otherwise wouldn't take public transportation start using public transportation. Good cities around the world, London, New York, Paris, the underprivileged and the wealthy, they all use public transportation.
Yeah.
If you go to Manhattan and New York, you'll see the biggest banker using public transportation with someone who's a hot dog vendor.
Yeah.
They'll be using this thing. Same in London. So we have to move towards that system. Can that happen? Yes. I think Delhi Metro is an example which is high quality service. Mumbai Metro will also be a good product. Can we move people who otherwise would prefer to be chauffeur driven to use public transportation, where they also realize it's much more efficient? In many cases, people who have to go from South Mumbai to North Mumbai often take the trains even now.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's far more efficient. You save half an hour. I remember in my last election campaign in 2019, I had to go to East Mumbai to campaign. The traffic it would have taken me 1 hour 45, 1.5 hours. I took the train. What's wrong in that? So someone now will say, I want an air-conditioned train. I want a metro. Quality of service will improve over time. So these are the things we need to think of. These are the things we need to reimagine. And I think Mumbai has the ability to do that. But, then there are also other challenges. Today you're saying Abu Dhabi, and we're talking about Middle East. Yes, they've done exceedingly well. Desert built into these huge global financial, cultural capitals of the world. But look what happened to Dubai recently with the floods. So Mumbai has to also be careful. Like Dubai, Mumbai is also a coastal city. Global warming is a reality. Icebergs are melting. Sea levels will rise. We also have to upgrade our stormwater drainage networks. When I was an MP from 2004 to 2009, I worked with the central government to get a grant to upgrade our stormwater drainage networks. There was a project called Brihan Mumbai stormwater drainage, because our stormwater drainage networks were built by the British.
Yeah.
So the pipes and tubes have a certain diameter, which when there's flooding, when there's global warming, they can't drain that water.
Yeah.
And then you have flooding. Now that's improved. I brought central assistance from the government of India. We need to do much more of those. We need to upgrade that tomorrow if the sea levels rise, water comes in, are we safe? If you don't have that good infrastructure, then this vision that I'm talking about, competing versus Dubai and Abu Dhabi, competing versus Singapore on the east, will not become a reality. Another city in India may get it right. Another part of Maharashtra may get it right. So it's very critical to do these things. And for that, you need good governance, you need good planning, you need a vision, and you certainly need the right kind of infrastructure.
So the stepping stone for that is also slum redevelopment, right? So what is the progress with slum redevelopment, and when will it be done? When will Mumbai be on the path where we actually utilize our land for better purposes than just inefficient housing?
See, Mumbai and Maharashtra have a very good scheme, which actually cities and states in India have come to study the SRA scheme.
Okay.
The slum rehabilitation scheme, which essentially incentivizes a private sector player to come in to work with the slum residents and to redevelop them and rehouse those people. Now, that's a good scheme. It's working well. There's a speed. We are seeing a speed at which slums which existed 10 years, now the people have been rehoused, and that it's doing away with slums. It's being used for more productive purposes, maybe a garden, maybe some other infrastructure. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that Mumbai cannot just be a city for the middle class, upper middle class. It also has to be a city where the lower middle class can access affordable housing.
Like Singapore.
Like many other parts of the world. If you look at New York, for instance, Manhattan has really become a very exclusive area where to rent homes, to buy homes is really reserved for the rich. The lower middle classes have to move to Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and the suburbs of New York City, Harlem. So we have to learn from different cities. How do you create a Mumbai where you can have people living in fancy 5-6 BHK apartments, 6,000, 7,000 BHK apartments, but also living with someone who is working, let's say, as a peon in an office, also living with somebody alongside somebody who is working as a driver in somebody's office. So that is the vision we have to have, in my opinion. I don't think we should drive people out. But yes, over time, you have to create transportation links wherein people who cannot afford to live in a certain area, but yet their workplace is that area. So let's say, for example, somebody cannot afford to live in BKC, but their workplace is BKC. They're working as a waiter in a restaurant in BKC. They're working as a peon in an office there. They're working as a driver in somebody who commutes between Worli to BKC. That they have affordable housing, but don't spend more than 20 to 30 minutes to reach their workplace.
Yeah.
If that person is spending 1 hour in a grueling way using public transportation to reach that workplace, obviously that person will be unproductive. So we have to provide that quality of service, those amenities, to people right in their homes. Affordable housing is one thing, an affordable rental market, good quality schools, hospitals in that area. I'll give you one example. I brought India's first cluster redevelopment project to South Mumbai.
What is that, sir?
Which is where, right now what happens, there's an old building in Mumbai. It's dilapidated. The tenants are paying an old rent, a very low rent. The landlord doesn't have money to repair that building. Nobody, who's going to pay for that building? That building is crumbling. It falls. It's almost going to break apart. That building needs to be redeveloped. The landlord and the tenants come together. They approach a developer. They redevelop that building. One building suddenly becomes a tower. A 4-5 story chawl suddenly becomes a 20 floor tower. There's so many more residents. There's so many more cars. There's so much more strain on the infrastructure, on the water pipelines, on the sewage pipelines. There's so much more demand for a school. There's so much more demand for a hospital. But yet the roads are as narrow. Look at Pali Hill.
Yeah.
Look how much time it takes in Pali Hill to move around. Because suddenly small buildings have now become tall towers. But the roads are the same.
Exactly.
So cluster means you plan an entire block, an entire cluster. You don't take one building, you take multiple buildings. And then you have a larger plate of land to plan on. You can then plan a school, a hospital. As the population increases, you can widen the roads. You can give those people who are being rehoused transit accommodations, temporary accommodations in that area. So their life and work is not disrupted. They don't have to suddenly move to a transit accommodation far away when their work is in that area. Their children don't have to be living far away when their school is in that area.
So what is it called, sir? Cluster?
Cluster redevelopment.
Cluster redevelopment.
Yes.
Now what is the status for this, sir? In the next 5 years, can we see an expansion?
Yes, it's happening in many parts of Maharashtra, many parts of Mumbai, where you're seeing a full cluster being taken, being planned, and people getting homes, better planning of infrastructure, better widening of roads, more resources, more hospitals, schools. So all this is happening. And this is how you have to reimagine projects. It's like an urban regeneration plan, but block by block, cluster by cluster. That's how Singapore and others did it.
That was exactly,
Singapore was a
HDB
slum.
did the same
Singapore
thing,
was a big slum.
Yeah.
Singapore was people living in chawls. They took that and planned cluster by cluster. If you plan building by building, then you'll have an infrastructure problem. Then you'll have a traffic problem. You'll have a water problem. You'll have a sewage problem. You'll have a school problem. You'll have a hospital problem. If you plan cluster by cluster, you can mitigate that to a large extent.
So what are the top 3 clusters that you're working on right now?
I wouldn't say I'm working on any cluster, but there are many areas in South Mumbai and Mumbai where residents are keen that their project gets developed into a cluster. So there is a very large area, for example, in Shinde called Abhyuday Nagar. Residents who've been trying for a long time. They tried through many schemes, but now cluster is something which has excited them, is incentivizing them, let's go forward. The Bhendi Bazaar redevelopment project in a very congested part of Mumbai. Today it's being developed as a cluster. People getting homes, but infrastructure being planned, widened roads. Even temples and mosques being rehabilitated. So these are things one has to think of. Urban regeneration is a very serious issue. There is micro level urban planning and urban regeneration, things like I talked to you about. But at a macro level, we have to, as a country, as states together, rethink of how do we allow people to move to urban areas, but yet absorb people from rural areas into urban areas, but also incentivize people to live in rural areas. Today in India versus China, 1/3 of India lives in cities. 2/3 of India lives in villages. In China, it's exactly the opposite. 2/3 of Chinese people live in urban areas, and 1/3 of Chinese live in rural areas and are dependent on the agricultural economy. So for India, we have to plan our urbanization very quickly. We are one of the fastest urbanizing economies in the world. But at the same time, encourage people to look at agriculture as a sustainable source of income.
Organic farming is one such thing.
There are many areas as an attractive source of income. There's hydro farming. There's many kinds of things. There are new technologies now people are experimenting with abroad called agri-mining, where you use plants that have high resources of minerals. You mine minerals, rare earths, nickel through plants.
Wow.
That's a future area, agri-mining. So these are all things, these are technologies that are happening. I believe one thing I would say, a very high level statement, is I think after COVID, there's been a very big reset in the world. I think after the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe is also reimagining its energy. Europe is also again looking at nuclear, which is a clean source of energy, which in my opinion, contrary to public opinion, which thinks that nuclear is a bad source of energy. In fact, if you ask somebody anywhere in the world, people did a poll that do you prefer a coal-fired thermal plant, which will cause more pollution in your own community, more congestion, more disease, more heart illness, to nuclear, which has been largely very safe and it's completely clean. People opt for coal.
Correct.
So now Europe understands that because they were overly dependent on Russia, and now after the Russian-Ukraine war, Europe is innovating in a massive way. They're looking at nuclear energy, they're looking at other sources of green energy. So I think COVID also brought about a big reset. People moving away from China. India, as I said, was prepared thanks to the Make in India plan and the vision of the Prime Minister. How do we create manufacturing? Today, countries like Singapore have very localized manufacturing. There are, I think Hyundai, if I'm not mistaken, has small micro factories in Singapore, which are churning out cars.
Germany is also a classic example of
completely automated. So all of these things are being re-looked at now. And I think it's a very exciting time to be an entrepreneur, to be somebody who's in a new age sector. I'm unfortunately in politics, but I would say to a young person that there's so many opportunities for India and the world.
So, sir, if I were to summarize your vision for Maharashtra and your party's vision for Maharashtra and Mumbai, it would be developing new centers of economic growth. Number 2 is extending the bars of town planning from not just Chennai and Bangalore, extending the bars of town planning from Chennai and Bangalore to now Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Then it would be to increase ease of doing business. And lastly, it would also be about looking out for alternate fuel opportunities. Have I summarized it well?
Yes, I would say that alternate fuel opportunities is something which is not necessarily only for Maharashtra, but innovation across India. That's something I'm very passionate about.
Okay.
I'm very excited when I meet young entrepreneurs who are doing very interesting, who are entering sectors which like space, sending missions to the moon, a huge area now of concern. Again, we can talk about it for hours. The Chandrayaan mission, which went to the South Pole, is there water on Mars, on the moon? There's helium on the moon. There's a helium shortage in the world. How can India play a role with companies like Tesla, private companies like Tesla, with global companies, with global governments? I'm very excited when I see a company like IdeaForge, one of the biggest drone companies in India, supplying right now to the government of India, to the defense, but being able to even become a drone supplier to the US. Because mind you, even in a country like the US, the local municipalities for the fire departments in the US, the police departments, they buy drones for security purposes, for firefighting purposes, but they're overly reliant on Chinese drones, and which they think is a security threat. Huge opportunity for Indian drones to be exported there.
True.
So I think there are a lot of exciting places for Indian entrepreneurs. Certainly I would be happy if Maharashtra took a lion's share of those and became the innovation capital of the country. But I'm excited for India as a whole.
So what are the 3 sectors that you would go extremely bullish on if you were an entrepreneur?
I think warehousing is a huge opportunity as people move heavily into, as e-commerce continues to grow, warehousing is a huge opportunity to be able to deliver a good quickly to a consumer who's increasingly buying things online. There'll be a lot of scope for warehousing. I think indoor farming, urban farming, I think is a huge area in India.
Okay.
It's starting in a very small way to take shape globally, but I think it's a huge, huge area. The third area I would look at,
manufacturing?
I would say in manufacturing also, in certain high-end strategic electronics, but for that, frankly, I'm not sure if I would be equipped for that. You need to be an IIT engineer like for example, Ankit Mehta, who I know, who's the founder of IdeaForge. Bright guys, they know what they're doing. So, any area where the world has been traditionally very dependent on Chinese supply chains and is now looking to move away from those Chinese supply chains. I think there's a huge opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs to plug themselves into that, even if they're not making chips, but even in the manufacturing of chips, which go into our phones, which go into our televisions, which go into our cars, reducing the dependence on, say, Taiwan. There are many ancillary units being created. A Tata today is making semiconductors. They can't do everything.
Correct.
They'll have to outsource a lot of things to smaller players. So, following that strategic vision that the world is looking to divest from China, can India play a role and fulfill that?
Solar being a classic example of the same. Ingot manufacturing does not happen in India. 99% of it happens in China.
Yes, China pretty much controls the solar ecosystem.
Yeah.
Lithium, for example, which goes into every battery of ours, the lithium-ion battery. Innovating in lithium, in new batteries, sodium-ion batteries, what they call lithium-ion silica batteries. Changing the anode, replacing it with silica instead of graphite. These are technologies which are happening around the world. Of course, some of these are high-end technologies, but I think indoor farming, very exciting area. And the first one that I mentioned,
warehousing.
So
Okay.
these are areas these are simpler areas, but the strategic electronic areas is where you would find more value. But you need to be very bright. I'm certainly not one of those.
Okay.
I'm not an IIT engineer or a IIT dropout. But you need to be one of those, and then there's a lot of scope to do that.
Sir, one last question that I want to ask you, and you're completely okay to skip this also. The reason I want to ask this question is because this is one of the most popular questions from our community, and that is about the whole dictatorship narrative that is out there. What do you think about that, sir? And how much truth there is to this whole dictatorship narrative?
When you say dictatorship narrative, what are you talking
There's
about?
a lot of narrative which says that, Modi ji is becoming a dictator. BJP is proceeding towards dictatorship. And I know that this has been the narrative for the past
See, I would
10 years.
I would say this.
Okay.
The fact that a man who came from the most humble beginnings can rise to become the Prime Minister of India on its own tells you that our democracy is very strong and very vibrant. The fact that a man who was a auto rickshaw driver is today the Chief Minister of the second largest state in India, Maharashtra, that on its own tells you that our democracy and that our constitution is strong. The fact that most political parties in India are undemocratic, that the top slot is reserved for one person or for a member of a particular family, on its own tells you that are those the parties and the people that are going to strengthen India's democracy or weaken India's democracy? That would be my answer.
Very interesting. Sir, I would love to go deeper into all of what we spoke about, because today we have the constraint of time. We have to end this episode. But do let me know if you really liked this, because I would like to go on for another 3 to 4 hours to get into the deeper insights of governance, because we've been trying to do our level best to talk about social indicators, economic indicators, and ease of doing business. And no matter how much we scrape through the internet, there is only a limited amount of information that we can find. But if I have your permission to have more of your time in the future,
absolutely,
I would love to go deeper into it and do a timely analysis of the governance of India, so that we can give the people of India a very authentic perspective of what is happening,
sure,
along with data and more insight, so that they can understand the vision of the party. And because we have this podcast, we have the luxury of time to be able to go deeper into the aspects like e-governance. Otherwise, before this podcast, to me, e-governance was just a terminology. I did not know what it meant. And similarly, in spite of me going deeper into the understanding of governance, if these things are just terminologies to me, it clearly says that there is a dire need for more awareness,
sure,
amongst the youth of the country and for the citizens of the country.
No, I'm more than happy to come back to this. Thank you for this advanced invitation. Consider it as a yes. And we can go deeper into politics, deeper into governance. I'm more than happy to share my experiences as an MP, as a political activist, as someone who's been a minister, with you, with your viewers, listeners, to help create awareness. That's in fact been a big part of my politics. I used to organize an event called Youth Parliament to bring young people to Parliament. Don't look at government as distant from you. You are government. In a democracy, you are the government. Who you vote for comes to government. Government is owned by you. You are the custodian. Politicians are the custodians on your behalf. We are your representatives on your behalf. But you are the owner. And therefore, taking ownership based on your understanding is very, very important. So I'm more than happy to do that, to come back to you and share my experiences with you at any time.
That is amazing, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ganesh. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.